Today, we're ranking every major aircraft of World War II, from the fighter that was the nightmare of its own pilots, to the aircraft built by furniture makers that outran every fighter Germany could put in the sky. And trust me, not everyone is going to agree with number 1. Rank 15. Hawker Hurricane. It's August 1940, and a fitter at Biggin Hill is standing on a wing with a needle and a tin of dope, sewing a Hurricane back together. That's not a joke. Behind the cockpit, the Hurricane wasn't metal, steel tube wrapped in doped fabric, a 1930s airframe wearing a modern engine, which sounds like a weakness until you see what it meant on the ground. A Hurricane shot to pieces in the morning could be patched by its own squadron and flying by evening. Damaged Spitfires often went back to a depot. Hurricanes mostly didn't leave. Cannon shells frequently punched clean through the rear fabric without finding anything solid enough to fuse against. It absorbed punishment almost by accident. By 1942, it was finished as a frontline fighter. It flew on anyway, in Africa and Burma, carrying bombs for another 3 years. Last on this list, and still the reason there's a list at all. Rank 14. North American B-25 Mitchell. Skip the Doolittle Raid. Everyone does the Doolittle Raid. The more interesting Mitchell was rebuilt in Australia by an American named Paul Gunn, who decided that dropping bombs from altitude was the wrong idea entirely. He tore the bombardier's position out of the nose and packed it with 50 caliber machine guns, turning a medium bomber into a low-flying shotgun. Then the 5th Air Force paired those guns with skip bombing. In at mast height, release so the bomb bounces across the water into the ship's side rather than its deck. At the Bismarck Sea in March 1943, a Japanese convoy carrying reinforcements to New Guinea met that combination. Very little of it arrived. The Mitchell was never the best bomber of the war on any spec sheet. It was the most adaptable, and in the Pacific, adaptable one. Rank 13. Ilyushin IR-L2 Sturmovik, roughly 36,000 built, more than any other military aircraft in history by any nation, in any war. The reason is a decision almost nobody else dared. The armor wasn't bolted on, it was the airplane. Engine bay, cockpit, and fuel sat inside one welded steel shell that carried the structural loads itself. No frame underneath. The armor was the frame. For the pilot, it worked. Ground fire that would have shredded anything else rattled off. The problem came from behind. Early Sturmoviks had nothing covering the tail, and Luftwaffe pilots worked out the geometry fast, so the Soviets added a rear gunner and did not extend the armored shell to cover him. He sat outside the protection in a canvas sling with a machine gun and the sky. By most accounts, those gunners died at several times the rate of the men 3 feet in front of them. Same aircraft, same mission, completely different odds. Rank: Boeing B-29 Superfortress. The strangest thing about the most advanced aircraft of the war is that almost nothing it was designed to do is what it ended up doing. It was built for pressurized, high-altitude daylight precision bombing, remote-controlled turrets, computerized fire control, a development program that cost more than the atomic bomb it eventually carried. At 30,000 feet over Japan, it met a jet stream nobody had planned for, blowing bombs miles wide. It also kept catching fire. The Wright R-335-0 used magnesium in the crankcase, and an overheating engine didn't simply fail. It burned hot enough to threaten the wing spar. Crews joked, without much humor, that Curtiss Wright was killing more of them than the Japanese. LeMay's answer in early 1945 was to strip out most of the guns, drop to a few thousand feet, and go in at night with incendiaries. The most sophisticated bomber ever built, flying low and slow like something from 1918. Rank 11. Avro Lancaster. No aircraft carried more, further, with less fuss. The Lancaster's bomb bay was 33 feet of uninterrupted space, which is why it could take the 12,000-pound tallboy and later the 22,000-pound Grand Slam, weapons nothing else in the world could physically fit. And yet, if a Lancaster was going down, the crew had to reach a forward escape hatch that was, for men in full flying kit, in an aircraft burning or spinning, brutally small. Commonly cited figures put Lancaster bailout survival at roughly half that of the Halifax, the aircraft it's usually said to have outclassed. Historians argue the exact numbers. Nobody argues the direction, so it's two aircraft at once. Bomber Command's finest instrument and a machine significantly harder to get out of than its less loved stablemate. Great aeroplane, bad door. Rank 10, Grumman F6F Hellcat. What do you build when your problem isn't the enemy's best pilot, but your own newest one? By 1943, the U.S. Navy was producing carrier pilots faster than it could produce experience. Grumman's answer was an aircraft fast enough, tough enough, and above all, forgiving enough that a 21-year-old with limited hours could take it into combat and come back. Wide track gear, docile stall, visibility over the nose the Corsair couldn't match. Nothing about the Hellcat is exotic. Everything about it is deliberate. You'll hear a kill ratio of 19-1 quoted. Treat it carefully. It's a real wartime figure, but it measures a period when Japanese pilot training had collapsed, and historians have picked at it for decades. The honest version is better anyway. The Hellcat took a generation of half-trained aviators and made them survivable. That's a harder problem than building a hot rod. Rank 9, Lockheed P-38. Lightning, two engines, twin booms, and a nose full of guns firing straight ahead instead of converging at a fixed range. On paper, the P-38 belongs higher than this. In the Pacific, it was that good. America's two top-scoring aces of the war both flew it, and the long-range interception of Admiral Yamamoto over Bougainville was a P-38 mission because nothing else had the legs. Over Europe it struggled, for a reason that's almost absurd. The engine sat out on the booms, far from the cockpit, so there was no convenient source of cabin heat. At 25,000 feet over Germany in winter, pilots flew with frostbitten hands and feet, unable to feel the controls, in an aircraft that also locked up in high-speed dives. Same airplane. Warm ocean. It's a legend. Cold sky. It's a medical problem. Rank 8. Messerschmitt Me 262. Mustang pilots who met one in 1944 described watching an aircraft leave them behind as though they were standing still. That part is entirely true, and it's why the 262 sits this high. The rest is the tragedy. Those Jumo 004 turbojets used substitute alloys. Germany had no nickel or chromium to spare, and wore out in something like 10 to 25 hours of running. A jet engine with the service life of a long weekend. Worse, they had to be handled like glassware. Push the throttle forward too fast, and the engine could flame out or catch fire. So the fastest aircraft in the world was most helpless exactly where every aircraft is. Slow, low, on approach. Allied fighters worked that out and simply waited over the airfields. 5 years ahead of everything in the sky, and pilots died learning it. Being first isn't the same as being best. Rank 7, Supermarine Spitfire. In 1940, our ASA pilots found a fault that could kill them mid-fight. Pushed the nose down hard into a dive, -G, and the Merlin's float carburetor flooded. The engine coughed, and for a few seconds, you had a glider. The Bf-109's fuel-injected Daimler-Benz didn't care. German pilots learned to escape by bunting straight down, knowing the Spitfire behind them would stumble. The fix came from an engineer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment named Beatrice Schilling, a small brass washer with a hole in it, fitted into the fuel line to limit flow. It stopped the cutout, and RAF crews gave it a nickname we'll politely record as Miss Schilling's Orifice. That's the Spitfire in miniature. Never perfect, always fixable. 24 marks. An airframe from 1936 still frontline in 1945. Its limit was never the aircraft. It was the fuel tank. Rank 6, the Messerschmitt Bf 109. Every German ace you can name flew this. The top scorers of the war flew it almost exclusively. And the 109 fought from the first day to the last. Those tallies are also the most argued over numbers in aviation history, and they should be. German pilots flew until they died against opponents whose training varied enormously on a front thick with targets. That inflates a score without inflating an aircraft. What isn't argued is the engineering. The 109 was small, light, repairable in a field, but the same obsession produced an undercarriage attached to the fuselage rather than the wings, narrow-tracked and unforgiving. Estimates vary, but a substantial fraction of all 109 losses had nothing to do with combat. They happened on takeoff and landing, and climbed sharply as training hours collapsed after 1943, an aircraft that demanded a good pilot in a country that ran out of them. Rank 5. Focke-Wulf FW190. Kurt Tank designed this for a customer nobody else was designing for, the average pilot and the exhausted mechanic behind him. Where the 109 assumed skill, the 190 assumed fatigue. Wide track gear so a tired man could put it down at night. Engine panels a ground crew could pull in the open, in the mud, in Russia. The centerpiece was a device called the Commando Jarrett, a mechanical computer wired to one throttle lever that managed mixture, propeller pitch, boost, and ignition timing together. One hand, one lever. A pilot who'd have been juggling 4 controls in a Spitfire could put both eyes back outside the cockpit. When the 190 appeared over France in 1941, RAF squadrons on Spitfire Vs were outclassed in nearly everything that mattered, and it took most of a year to answer. The 109 got the aces. The 190 got the job done with whoever was left. Rank 4. Republic P-47. Thunderbolt 7 tons. That's what pilots meant by the Jug, an aircraft so absurdly large the standing joke was you could evade by unbuckling and running around the cockpit. The bulk had a reason. The turbo supercharger sat back in the rear fuselage, which meant enormous ducts running the length of the aircraft, carrying exhaust back and pressurized air forward. That plumbing is why it looks like a milk bottle, and why it kept flying with holes through it. There was simply a great deal of airplane between incoming fire and anything that mattered. Luftwaffe pilots reported emptying their ammunition into Thunderbolts that then flew home. But it's this high for a different reason. From late 1943, the P-47 came off escort duty and went down to the deck and spent the rest of the war destroying what actually moved German combat power. Trains, trucks, fuel columns. Not glamorous. Decisive. Rank 3. Vought F4U Corsair. The Corsair nearly didn't make this list because in 1943, the U.S. Navy declared it unfit for carriers. They weren't wrong. The long nose blocked forward vision on approach, the stall arrived without warning, and the undercarriage bounced hard enough to throw an aircraft back into the air. Pilots called it the Ensign Eliminator, and they weren't being affectionate. The solution came from the Royal Navy, which needed a fighter and wasn't in a position to be fussy. Fleet Air Arm pilots abandoned the straight approach and came in on a curve, keeping the deck visible past the nose until the last moment. British engineers raised the seat and cut down the canopy so the pilot could see out. The Fleet Air Arm was flying Corsairs off carrier decks before the U.S. Navy cleared them too. What remained was the fastest carrier fighter of the war, still in production in 1952. Nothing else here can say that. Rank 2. North American P-51 Mustang. Forget the Merlin for a moment. Everyone knows about the Merlin. Here's what the Mustang's range actually cost. To reach Berlin and still fight when it got there, North American added an 85-gallon fuel tank behind the pilot's seat, well aft of the center of gravity. With it full, the aircraft was genuinely unstable. Pull hard, and it could reverse the stick forces on you and depart controlled flight entirely. So every escort mission opened with a pilot flying gently for the first hour, nursing a twitchy aeroplane across the channel and into Germany, burning that tank down before he was allowed to fight properly. The range wasn't a gift from a British engine. It was bought with an hour of flying something that didn't want to be flown, and it purchased the decisive change of the air war. From 1944, nowhere over Germany was out of reach. Rank 1. De Havilland Mosquito. The Air Ministry didn't want it. An unarmed wooden bomber in 1940 was not what a committee facing the Luftwaffe wanted to hear about. De Havilland built it anyway, and the wood turned out to be the strategic masterstroke. Britain's aluminium was rationed and its aircraft factories saturated. The Mosquito needed neither. It was built by furniture manufacturers, cabinet makers, and piano firms. An entire industrial base sitting outside the war effort, suddenly producing frontline aircraft that competed with nobody for materials or skilled labor. And the thing they built was faster than the fighters sent to catch it. That's the whole argument. Strip out the guns and the gunners, and the speed you gain is worth more than the defense you lose. Mosquito squadrons flew deep into Germany and came home with the lowest loss rate of any type in Bomber Command. Then it did everything else: night fighter, pathfinder, photo reconnaissance, anti-shipping. And when the RAF needed one specific building hit, a Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, a records office in Copenhagen, it was Mosquitoes going in at rooftop height at a time when heavy bombers were pleased to hit the right city. Fastest, most versatile, cheapest in the only currency that counts, which is crew. Number one, and it isn't close.
If you liked this video, I'm sure you'll like this one too. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Our channel is small, so we are replying every comment below.